Hi, I'm Lori.
And I'm Kevin, and this is No Longer Ashamed.
We are survivors of childhood sexual abuse.
And we're here to share with you that if you're a survivor, you don't have to be alone.
Our logo is a salamander, and the reason is a fire salamander can survive a fire, and you have survived a fire.
We want to help you with your journey to healing and hope.
We are all survivors together, and we walk this journey together, and you are not alone.
By telling our stories, we are hoping that you will have the courage to share your stories as well and find your voice.
Because stories are so important, and for so long I know that I wouldn't tell my story, but when I finally shared my story, that's when I got my freedom.
And this is our journey and your journey to healing and hope. So come with us.
I am so excited to introduce to you my friend Jerry Lin. He is a letting go therapist, and I met him on a masterclass. I had no idea that he had a story. And so when I found out, I invited him to come on the podcast and share his story of childhood abuse. So Jerry, welcome.
Thank you, Lori. It's good to be here.
Thank you. What really hit me when you were on my masterclass, something that really stood out to me was, and we can talk about this after you share your story, was how you said men will bulk up physically and do all those things. And I never made the connection of when you bulk up, you're all tight and you're not letting go. And so that's what really intrigued me. So I hope we can get to that too after you share your story and talk about some of the things we do and then how we learn to modify and get the help that we need.
Absolutely. No problem. Did you want me to just jump in? Okay.
Wherever you want to start.
So I went through 9 divorces, 4 with my dad, 4 with my mom, and 1 with my stepmother. She was the one that raised me. So 9 total. I was the firstborn of the first marriage between my parents.
Wow.
So I experienced it all. And being an immigrant, my parents being immigrants, I was born in the States in Los Angeles, California. We had a different set of rules inside the house and outside the house. Inside the house, it was speak Chinese, it was eat Chinese food, and typically meant strict disciplinarian beatdowns on a weekly basis. And it was actually just normal. It became normalized in my life. I didn't realize that it was any different anywhere else. Until I remember one day, probably in 3rd or 4th grade, walking to school with shorts, and people would start commenting on the welt lines behind my legs, behind my calves. For me, it was just normal because it was just another day at the Lin's household. But for them, it was a thing, and I would hear the whispers and the pointing. And then I remember in the 80s, all of a sudden on TV, those drug commercials would come out, and also child abuse commercials would come out as well. And I would think to myself, wait, are they talking about me? Am I being abused? I was so far disassociated with that. I never even thought that was a thing because it was just a normal thing in my household. And so when those commercials came out and those hotline numbers came out, I'm like, man, do I need to call in my parents? It was such a mind F, right? Because of the rules inside the house and outside the house. And no matter what I learned outside the house, it almost didn't apply to how I was living inside the house. It was just 2 different cultures, 2 different languages, 2 different realities. So I had to learn at a very young age to cope. And I think when most people cope is they dissociate from their body. They go to their happy place, their hiding place. And oftentimes that's when they pull back. And one of the things I remember, one of my earliest memories, I remember my mother coming to my father's house to get me. And I want to say maybe 6 or 7. And I remember we had one of those round dining room tables with the one main stool in the middle with a tablecloth draped over it. And that was, my mom came, I ran from her, I hid from her under the table, and I clung onto that thing like my life depended upon it. And I just remember just crying and sobbing. And my mom would come out and she found me and she just grabbed me and she pulled me out. And so my parents figured out that I was always very emotional and stressful. And so what they do, instead of talking to me or nurturing me or explaining things to me or soothing me, what they did to get around that was they actually waited for me to sleep and they would ship me over to my mom's house. So the next morning I'd wake up in a brand new room.
Oh.
And the craziest part of it all too was that my mom was a real estate investor back in the 80s and 90s. So she was always flipping houses. So it wasn't like I would go back to the same familiar room that I would recognize. I would literally wake up in a new room almost every single time.
Mm.
I would think to myself, where the heck am I? And
Mm.
so, but then I got smarter. I started recognizing the clues of when I would be transported. And that clue was if I saw a basket of my clothes folded close by, I associated that with the move. So I knew that the next day I would be somewhere else. And that's how it went. And it was, my parents, they were so out of reality, especially my father. I mean, it was so bad. I remember my dad had custody over me. So I would spend the school year with my father, and during the summers, many summers I would spend with my mom. And when I got older, when I was about 15 or 16, I got another beat down from my mother. I remember I was crying and I was sobbing, and I just said, "Screw it, I'm out." And I packed up my backpack with my books, my duffel bag with my clothes, my boombox, and I was riding on my 12-speed bicycle with those little, really skinny tires. And I was riding through, getting out of this one-way street. And I just remember telling myself, I better hurry the F up before my mom comes home, because there's only one way home, and she lived at the end of the cul-de-sac. And if she found me, she would give me another beat down. And I was crying so much that I couldn't really see. And I remember I saw the spider at the end of one of my handlebars, and lo and behold, I started to lean towards the right, and I crashed into the car. I flipped over, my bags went all over the place. I picked myself up, even though I was scraped, I was bleeding, and I rode to my dad's house, and I was crying and crying. My dad came home and said, "What are you doing here?" And I couldn't even express myself. I was so terrified. And you know what my father did? The next day, he sent me back to my mom's house. That's how out of touch they were, how unconscious they were. And so I called them the summers of hell, the middle passages, were my summers of hell. And those were the memories that I grew growing up. And it never ended. My partner, she has a really amazing story too. Her father actually killed her mother when she was 5 and her sister 3. And she went through a lot of depression and all that. And here we are, these two souls joining together in this lifetime on this plane, trying to figure out this pain. And I remember one day we were arguing over something, and I said to her, I'm like, look, I'm not saying what I went through was any easier than what you went through. You went through so much intense pain, but it was short because your parents are no longer here with us. But I'm still going through that. A lot of this cultural abuse, manipulation, still going, still continuing, and it hasn't stopped. And my father passed, but my mom's still there, and she often tries to manipulate our relationship with money, being the tiger mom in the Chinese culture that she comes from. So this is sort of the background that I grew up with.
Wow. And have you ever had a conversation with your mom saying, this was abuse, or have you just moved on? How have you coped?
I'm 47 now, so throughout the years I've had interactions with my mom, and times where we would really connect, and I would try to explain to her some of the things that I went through as a kid, and she can't hear it. She would just get very defensive. She would just start yelling, and it's like talking to the wall. Right? So I really had to find another way to release the pain, and it wasn't through her, but it was through me.
Yeah.
And that was actually one of the greatest gifts that I learned, was instead of pointing outward, I started to point inward to find the inner strength. And that was the thing that allowed me to heal myself, because that gift doesn't depend on anybody else but you.
So you said you were hearing these commercials and you started to recognize that this wasn't okay. But when did you start your healing process?
I probably didn't start my healing process until my mid-30s. What happened then was I was in the relationship with my partner. We just started it. She got pregnant, and that just triggered everything from within my body. Everything, all the old memories of my dad not being a good dad, my mom not being a good mom, me being sort of kicked and bounced around these two households. And so when my partner got pregnant with my son, we went through a separation as well, because all these negative triggers were coming up. And then I remember thinking to myself, just like my father, he was a single dad driving a Mercedes-Benz, blue colored, and I was sitting in the back seat. Now I'm reliving that reality. I'm a single dad with a blue BMW with my son in the back seat. And I knew at that point, if I didn't really look deep and do the change, that reality would happen all over again. And I would pass that down to my son as well.
Yeah.
So that day, I remember drawing a line in the sand, and I remember promising myself that I will do anything and everything to clear that runway so that my son didn't have to go through the same BS that I had to go through.
And what did that entail when you made that decision? Was it just a conscious decision to move forward? Did you get help? Did you talk to somebody?
It was a conscious decision to get as much help as I could. And I went to the more non-traditional Western routes, meaning I did a lot of talk therapy. I did a lot of counseling. I did a lot of, therapy sessions, but I just found that wasn't enough. And so I started looking to the non-traditional routes. I started looking at healers and spiritual teachers and gurus and shamans. And anytime I was so desperate that anytime anyone said, you got to try this, you got to talk to this person, I basically would book a ticket wherever they were within the next week and would have that option. And I just kept going and I kept going. I did that. Those were my teachers, and also many books, and also a lot of plant medicines. I've explored those as well. And those did a lot of healing for me as well. So I've tried everything. If you've heard it, I probably tried it. Thing under the sun.
Wow.
And it takes that much commitment and dedication for you to move all that negative energy out. It's like what they say with rocket ships, that it takes tremendous amounts, exponential amounts of power to just get off the ground.
Yeah.
They burn about 70 or 80% of the fuel just for liftoff. And that's what it takes for us to get out of that victim mentality. It takes so much commitment, dedication, and perseverance, and you got to just keep going. And the amazing thing, I remember one night, I did an ayahuasca ceremony, my very, very first time. And ayahuasca ceremonies last for about 6 to 8 hours. And then there's no clock, so nobody really knows the time. But I just remember I was in child's pose for, I would guess, about 3 to 4 hours. And I was just weeping and weeping. And the first hour or two, I remember I was weeping for my own pain, my own sorrow, my own victimhood. And after that, it wouldn't stop. The tears wouldn't stop. And I just kept crying and crying and crying. And the next day, my shaman told me that, it's like, wow, Jerry, he's like, that was something. I don't really see that very often. And he said that I was going through some generational pains. And he said what I was releasing and letting go of were things that were passed down to me from generations, and that the healing that I did on myself would actually heal the 7 generations before and the 7 generations after.
Wow.
Now, I can't prove the before, but what I can prove is the after, because my son is completely different. When he was first born, he was colicky. He was not a very affectionate child, baby. Oftentimes when we would hug and hold and snuggle him, he would push us away, literally push us away. And he looked like he had a really negative look on his face, got like a scowl. Since I've done the work, he's done a complete 180. He's kind of a ham. He's the party of the room. He's always positive. When you see his pictures, he's always smiling. Not only that, the one generation that can prove it before is my mom. She started to open herself up to doing the work, and she started changing. How much change will she do? That's her journey, but she started to crack, which is really cool.
Wow.
So when you say she started to crack, what ways do you recognize that? What do you see her doing that's different now?
She oftentimes there'll be a slight pause before she blows up, whereas before there was no pause. There'll be like a moment of recognition, and then she'll blow up. But I remember I started with that too. When I started going down this journey of self-discovery and self-awareness, spirituality, I remember that I would also start recognizing a short pause before I would get really, really angry, or before there was no pause. You know how many times people would just get angry just like that?
Snap. Yeah.
Snap. And I remember one time I was driving in LA, and traffic in LA is crazy. And I remember one time there was a brief pause before I started honking and yelling in my car. And I was like, but that pause was everything. I was like, what was that pause? And I knew I was onto something. So I continued doing what I was doing. And that 1 second became 2, the 2 became 4, 4 became 8, and the pauses just became longer and longer.
Yeah. I love that you talk about how it is layers and it's a journey and it's a process, because I feel like sometimes people think once they share their story or once they say their truth, then that's it. And I know for me, I remember going to, back in my day, all we had was like Al-Anon or AA. And so that's where I went. And I remember a friend of mine who had been an alcoholic. She said, yeah, I'm not going to go anymore. I go, really? She goes, yeah, no, I'm good. I'm healed. And I'm like, that's so not fair. I have to keep going. I knew I had a lot of work to do. And the one thing that you talked about, that Kevin and I talk about this all the time, is often we have behaviors that we don't even know are hurting all the people around us.
Yes.
Because we're still the victim. And so we don't recognize we're hurting those that we love. And so when we start to get the healing and we start to change our behavior, we can be more loving towards those around us. And if anything, that's the gift of sharing your story and doing the work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And also Kevin and I recognize for men, it's a lot different. That's why Kevin decided that we would do this together, because we do focus a lot on men that have been abused, but there's that masculinity. And I think that's kind of what you were talking about in, men go and they bulk up. They're going to protect themselves. They're not going to be taken advantage of. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So with males, we put on muscle and we tend to pound weight, and we tend to bulk up, and we tend to, when we get hurt, when we get beat, we start to contract. But when you bulk up and you gain a lot of muscle and you're flexing, you're contracting. And that's actually the opposite of what we need to be doing. And so I'm not saying all, but I do know personal friends of mine that are bodybuilders that have been through some abuse in their childhoods. And so that's a way of them armoring up against the world, so that the world can't punish them or can't hurt them. And I also went through that in my 20s. I used to be a gym rat, and I used to work out a lot. And I thought that, I was using the anger to help protect me by putting on all this muscle. But what I didn't realize was that wall, that energetic wall that I was building around my heart, was actually hurting me from connection with people, from connection with finding my true love, right? Connection with my friends, my family, my parents, even most importantly, the connection to myself. I couldn't find self with that big wall around my heart. And so oftentimes what I tell my clients is that when you look at me in this 47-year-old body, before doing the work, I'm actually operating from a 7, 10, 12-year-old self, that self that got hurt. So it's almost like we have computer sense, we have the fastest hardware, but we're running like Windows 92, right? So I try to remind myself when my mom acts out to look beyond that 80-year-old body, try to look past that and try to look at her as a 7-year-old that's throwing a tantrum, and to find compassion for that person that wasn't able to discover this truth, find her peace or her happiness. I think that's what all of us are here to do, is to find that within ourselves.
You have a saying about show me the 7-year-old, show me the man. What is that?
Yeah, so there's a saying, the Jesuits have the saying, show me the boy until they're 7 and I'll show you the man. And so what they were able to figure out is how the subconscious mind works. So from 0 to 7, we are all recording the rules of society. And at around the age of 8, depending on the person, that's when their consciousness kicks in. And that's when the record button stops. And they hit rewind, and for the rest of their lives, they press play. So they're playing out the rules that they learned in the very first 7 years, whether it comes to money, to relationships, or to the way they think about themselves. That's all the rules that they've discovered in the first 7 years, right? So most of us we're on autopilot. We're unconsciously walking around just playing out these rules that we've learned. And if you came from a dysfunctional family, a broken family like me, I was just playing out what I learned. So my parents were never together from my earliest memories. I think my parents divorced when I was 1, maybe even younger. And at the age of, they divorced when I was at the age of 1. So what happened was, oh man, this is tough. I never remember them being together at all. Can you give me a second?
Mm-hmm.
This is really bringing up some memories. I feel fear. I feel the abandonment, feel the hurt, and feel the pain. So when my mom left my dad at the age of 1, I remember always feeling alone and scared and abandoned by my mother. So that was a rule that I learned. But what did I do in my adult life? I dated many, many women. And no matter, even if I knew that they weren't meant for me, what I always do was I would push them so that they could leave me. so that they could break up with me, so that I can revisit that feeling of abandonment over and over and over again. And how many of us have done that, jumping from relationship to relationship? And this was just a subconscious, unconscious habit programmed in my first year of life. So this is the awakening process that we do, is to be conscious of these programs, so they no longer run your life. They no longer dictate your life. They no longer rule over you anymore. Otherwise, you're bound to have them happen over and over and over again.
Yeah, I feel a lot of stuff coming up as well. I went through very similar. My father abandoned my family when I was very young, and I don't remember him before he left. I don't have those memories of what, even though apparently when he left, I mourned. I was maybe 3 or 4, not quite 4 years old, but my mom said I just would stand at the window crying because he was gone. But I don't remember him before. And that is also right about the time when my abuse started. And so I felt a lot of abandonment and also a lot of just confusion and fear because I didn't know what was happening. You know, I lost my father, he left, and then I was being abused. I didn't understand it. And I found hiding places, and I started hiding a lot. And then later on, when I was in junior high, I was abused again, and that just messed me up even further. So I think those things I was taught at an early age stuck with me and allowed me, or didn't allow me, but it basically led me to a life of being vulnerable and being a victim. And that happened for quite a few years until I was older and finally started addressing this. But I know that I still am haunted by those feelings of abandonment at times. And that's really hard to change. But I think what changed for me was when I started taking care of the inner child that was abandoned, that inner child that I had abandoned as well. And that's kind of the process I went through to try and take care of myself, was to take care of that kid that no one took care of when he needed help.
You know, Kevin, you talk about change, and it just occurred to me, because that's what we do when we get help. We try to change and be better, is that what Jerry talks about is not necessarily changing, but actually letting go. Can you address that, the difference, or if I'm missing the mark here, Jerry?
Yeah, so there's change. There's reprogramming or changing something, which is making something black to white or white to black, for example, or taking the black and just releasing it and letting that go, dissolving it. So it's a little subtle difference, but it makes a big change, huge difference. So here's the thing with the subconscious mind, is there's a thing called homeostasis. And with homeostasis, the mind wants to keep things about the same, 80 or 90% the same, with 10 to 20% variation, so that you don't get bored.
It's like a thermostat, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so when you try to change things, sometimes the subconscious mind will jump in there and it's like, whoa, 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 whoa. You're not taking that away from me. You're not taking away my pain. Don't take away my story. That's my anger. And it won't allow you to do that. But if you actually just allow yourself to be present with what is, with this emotion that's arising, instead of pushing it or shoving it or avoiding it or suppressing it, that emotion will come and it'll actually be processed and it'll actually go. So when I sat there in the beginning of our interview and I asked you guys for just a second, and I said, I feel fear, I feel abandonment, I was actually practicing sitting with those feelings. Instead of trying to change it, I was actually being present to it. And there's a huge distinction with that. Tony Robbins will be like, do your power move and say yes, and, jump and jumping jacks and drink the Kool-Aid and feel that fear. Yeah, just power through it, say yes, and that's sort of changing it. But in that change, there can be a sense of avoidance, of suppression.
It makes me think of that saying that I hear and I use as a coach, is what we resist persists. And I've probably said this on the show, here I'm in my 60s and childhood stuff is still causing me grief, So it shows that it doesn't really go away, but that we do the work, but also that it is a process. So maybe something that's plaguing me now is plaguing me on a lot different level than even 20 years ago. But like it's circular. It doesn't, it doesn't necessarily just go away. But when Jerry came on to one of my master classes and he had everybody in tears talking about leaning in and acknowledging it. And I think so often we're so trying to just get through the day that we just push things down. So taking that moment to just be like, this is what I'm feeling. And I may be feeling terrified, and that's okay because I'm safe right now.
That's right. Most of us do our own version of sex, drugs, and rock and roll, whatever that is, to avoid the pain, to avoid the abandonment, to avoid the fear, instead of sitting with what is actually present with you. These emotions, none of them no emotions are bad, but they're just actually here to be experienced. But when we run from some of these emotions, when we make these emotions negative or bad, that's when the suppression of those emotions actually do us the most damage. It isn't the anger that causes the damage. It's the suppression of that anger that causes and wreaks havoc on our body.
Yeah, I think that's what I was experiencing when I was addressing my inner child, was reaching back to feel what he was feeling, what he was going through, what his fears were, because like you said, I had done the full gamut of sex, drugs, and rock and roll to avoid everything and in excess. But when I finally allowed him to express his feelings, what he was going through and why, and that's when like you said, feelings aren't necessarily bad or good, they're information. And so I listened to him. I let him cry. I let him express his fear. I let him be angry that he'd been abandoned. I let him, be angry that he didn't get the childhood that he deserved, And that's when, like you said, those feelings were released. And that's when now he feels safe. He feels nurtured. He feels accepted.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you for sharing. And I just wanted to add that the time that most people think it takes to let something go is actually shorter than you know. It's a choice, and it could be as fast or as slow as you make it. And most of us think it's this slow, agonizing process, and it doesn't have to be.
No. Yeah.
It can be really fast.
So when did you become, I heard you say one time you're in Act 3. When did you become a therapist, and what brought you to that?
So when I was alluding to this earlier on the show, on your podcast, when my partner broke up with me and we had that separation, that brought up all my deepest, darkest fears, which was to have a broken family, to be a single dad, to be paying child support, all these things that I saw with my parents. And so that happened. So that opened up my dark night of the soul journey for me. And I dove in head first. And what happened was, when I started to heal myself, when I started doing all these different modalities, when I started to sit with all these teachers and all these books and all these plant medicines, I started to heal myself. And I looked around, and some of my peers, they were still stuck in their story. And I asked myself, why me? Why am I getting better? And they're still in the exact same place where I met them 5 years ago. So I realized that I was committed to doing the work. It's that blast off to space. I was committed daily to doing the work. They were waiting for these ceremonies to join and do these personal journeys together every 6 months, every 3 months, every month. But I was doing the work on a daily basis. And then when I got to these ceremonies, that was literally a celebration of all the work that I've done, versus, waiting to be a Sunday Christian, for example, right? I was being a Christian every single day of the week, and going to church was just a celebration, right? So I was committed to doing the work, and I wouldn't stop. I didn't stop. I couldn't stop until because I drew that line in the sand for my son, for me. I wouldn't pass on this nonsense, because I saw it in my father, I saw it in my grandfather, and he probably got it from his father. So this is like generational stuff that's just been literally passed down through the DNA, through the umbilical cord to us. And here we are just taking this stuff on, and there's no need. You can literally change not only your life, but the lives of the generations behind you, if you so choose.
Yeah. I love that. Of course, Kevin knows I'm always harping on the daily work because I feel like it's so easy for people to be like, take it so nonchalant. But, for me, it's so daily. And it's not like, oh, I'm going to fall apart if I don't do it. But the beauty is, by doing it, I'm, like you said, when you get to a certain place or a certain whatever you're going to do, you're way more prepared. And Kevin and I have noticed sometimes when people share their stories, we get a little triggered.
Mm-hmm.
But because we've done the work, we recognize it and we can stay present in the interview while somebody's sharing really hard things because we've done the work. In early days, it would be really easy to just get triggered and disappear. And we don't do that. And that's why the work is so important. And I feel like often there'll be people that say, well, I tried counseling, and I'm like, try again, try something else, keep going, keep trying. And it sounds like that was your commitment. You were like, I am going to find the way that works.
And I will tell you guys, what worked for me was realizing that all the things that I did in the past didn't work,
Mm-hmm.
and not continually to bang my head on the wall. I remember meeting this guy, and this was years ago, and doing ayahuasca with my neighbor. And I said to him, how many times have you done ayahuasca? And he sheepishly told me, today's my 100th time.
Mm.
And after a 3-day weekend, it's going to be 102. And so I said to him, after I got to know him through the weekend, I told him, look, if you're open, I think I could really help you. Because if you've done this for 100th time and you're still looking for that thing, this isn't it. As powerful and amazing and loving as ayahuasca is, it is the strongest hallucinogenic known to man on this earth. This isn't it. It's something else. So what I'm telling you is that whatever you've tried and it hasn't gotten you to the finish line, that's not it. And if you do that thing 100 or 1,000 more times, I'm pretty sure that's not it. There's other things out there that can get you to the finish line much quicker. As consciousness evolves, as mankind raises their consciousness level, the technology of meditation changes, right? Meditation was really cutting edge 50 years ago. But how many of us have tried meditation and cannot concentrate and think about what we have to make for dinner, or how much we have to pay for my son's whatever bill, or this and that? I equate meditation because they say now we have 60 to 75,000 thoughts a day. It used to be 50,000, but since, the advent of social media, now it's 60 to 75,000. They say that goldfish have attention span of 9 seconds, and that humans is actually 8 seconds. So we're actually worse than. But the point of all this is that she is saluting me right now. But
no, it's so powerful. It's find what works for you.
Find what works.
And so
I remember. It's a 60, 75,000 thoughts a day. So to me, that's like driving down the highway at 100 miles an hour and then slamming on the brake. You're trying to tell your mind to not think, and that's a very abrupt, jarring, kind of controlling way to do, your spiritual practice. So technology evolves. There's different ways that you can actually use to quiet the mind. And the traditional just meditation, for me, it doesn't work.
Yeah, I think that's often true for a lot of people. If they're not used to what it feels like to meditate, meditation just doesn't feel right, because we're always spinning. We're always, thinking ahead, or thinking about something that happened, or equating, or feeling like we're wasting time. And so if we're not seeing an immediate result, immediate payoff, we're just going to get tired of it quickly. But I think what's important, like you said, is if it's not working for you, then you should try maybe, look for something that might work better, but don't just give up. And I know for me, at first it was really hard, and especially I did group therapy with men that were also survivors. And at first it didn't seem like it was worth it, because we didn't really know each other. We had to build that trust. We had to build that foundation of trusting each other enough to talk about, because for men, we don't talk about things very much, especially things we're ashamed of, or things we've never talked about with anyone. And so it took probably months, I think, before we got to that place where we were actually experiencing breakthroughs and talking about stuff that really mattered. And I think it's important to, if it's not working for you, maybe you should try something else. But sometimes it helps to stick it out, because I know sometimes therapy takes a little while. You have to build that trust. You have to get to a place. So you should look at why it's not working for you, perhaps. Maybe you just haven't gotten to that place where you trust your therapist, And if that's the case, maybe there's a reason why you don't trust your therapist. I know for me, I have a hard time feeling comfortable with men being close, in any kind of intimate situation with men, like in therapy. But I had a male therapist and it worked because I didn't feel threatened by him. But I know I can't handle having male doctors or male barbers or male, I freak out. And even still. So I think maybe just if it's not working, look at why you feel it's not working. What is it that, isn't working for you? And then maybe addressing that.
Certainly, that can work. The key, I think, that even that I forget from time to time is that we're the creators of our lives. Many people talk about the law of manifestation and all this stuff, law of abundance and, law of vibration, but we're literally even creating the suffering. What Buddha says is that pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. So the stories that we keep holding on to, the ones that we keep ruminating over, the ones we keep spinning over like broken records, keep going, those are the ones that are really plaguing us. And so, yes, I agree with you that you can work it out and stay with it. But what I really want to bring to everyone's attention is that's actually a choice that you can actually let go as soon as you want. But most people choose to hold on. Even me, we choose, but that's a choice. As the creators of our lives, we get to choose whether we hold on or let go. But letting go is one of the most natural things, but we have forgotten how to let go. Instead, when we get hurt, when we do the clutching, we're used to the clutching now. So now we're just holding on. Now we're hitting the gym, building that muscle so that we can flex and clutch even more, tighter and harder. Hold on. Don't take away my pain. Remember, that's my story. How dare you? You don't know me. You don't know what I've been through. That's my story. Don't tell me to let that go.
I resonate with that, Jerry. I get in a lot of master classes and I hear talk about self-sabotage and, learning to love myself was a really big deal and it took a long time. But I recognize that often, and I think I'm getting better at it, but often there'll be something in my way. But like you said, that's mine. And so in a way, I'm choosing suffering. I'm choosing to live with that because I think that's all I deserve or all that I'm worthy of, that I don't even recognize that, oh, look, there's a choice. I can say, you know what? I'm not going to suffer anymore. I'm just going to let go of this because the fear of the unknown is like, but if I let go, then what have I got to complain about? What have I got to worry about? And I think that there's a huge fear in that letting go. And the fact that it can be done so quickly is just amazing.
Exactly. There is that fear of the unknown, but just really touching on what you're saying, when I pushed all my exes to break up with me, it wasn't, I hated that feeling. I loathed that feeling, that loneliness, that abandonment feeling, that the end of the relationship feeling, right? It wasn't because I deserved it or didn't deserve it. It wasn't that. It was actually easier than that. It was only because I was familiar with that feeling. Mm-hmm. I wanted to feel unconsciously. I wanted to feel that feeling again because that's the feeling that I felt when I was one. And this is how screwed up our mind is. That abandonment feeling was tied to my mother. So every time I felt abandoned, somehow I would feel more connected with my mother. So I would go out and create these relationships so that these women could break up with me, even though I knew I didn't want to be with them. So I could feel that abandonment over and over and over. I could feel that shame and victimhood over again. It's not because I deserved it or I didn't deserve it. It was just because of the familiarity, homeostasis, feeling that again and again and again.
And so also, breaking that was a decision. You said,
it's a huge
the kid in the back, in the back seat, you just said, no more.
No more. No more. And the first step is recognition and awareness. Declaring no more. The second step is the follow through. How many of you guys know people that said, I'm going to stop smoking, I'm going to go on a diet, I'm going to whatever they're going to do, but they go back right to it. So yes, that's the first step, but the second step is the follow through. So my follow through, and this is a big ego swallow, is that I do not know enough. I do not have the right tools to get me to the promised land. And who does? And how can I learn? Right? There's a saying you can learn how to punch by punching 10,000 punches yourself, or you can hire a coach and learn how to punch in 2,000 punches. With a coach, you got to pay them money. What they're going to do is they're going to collapse time. And I was done. I was done. I didn't want to live that reality that my father did. I didn't want to get remarried 4 times, have a son with different women, sons with different women, right? I wanted to carve out my own reality. So I had to humble my ego. I had to say, I do not know enough, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes for me to heal that generational wound that's not just binding me, but everyone in my family. And if I have to be that one in my lineage to stand up for my clan, I will do it. I will gladly do it. And if I have to talk about my feelings to heal that clan, you think that's weak? Talking about your feelings is the strongest, bravest, boldest thing you can ever do. And I gladly take that stand, because the man that I've become, no one could take that away from me. You could take away my money, you could take away my assets. These books, you can't take away what I've learned head and in my heart.
I think that's the contradiction that men struggle with so often, is that exploring our feelings is actually a sign of strength, is actually a lot harder and a lot more, it takes a lot more bravery to do that than to just hide them with our hypermasculinity, with our being tough, with being, not going there, exploring our feelings, exploring our emotions and what happened to us. It takes a lot more courage and a lot more bravery than just bottling it up and hiding it with muscling up, like you said, or, getting into martial arts or whatever it is that we do to hyper-masculine ourselves so we feel safe. It takes, and part of it is, it doesn't feel safe at first to explore our feelings. It feels very dangerous. I know for me, my father had a very dangerous temper and very scary. He was also alcoholic, and I think it was tied to that at times. And so I was afraid of anger. I bottled up anger. I wouldn't go there because I had seen what anger was like, and it was scary. So it took me a long time to address that. But I think the message that's so important for men to learn is it takes more courage, and it will make you a better man to explore that.
Yes.
You won't have to hide behind your hyper masculinity.
And then you can be free.
Yeah.
Without hiding, without shaming yourself, without not feeling good enough, without needing other people's approval. Only then can you be completely free, and you can show up. Be as you are, and then the chase stops. You no longer need to chase for the bigger bank account, for the bigger projects, for the bigger houses, or for the fancier cars, for the more girlfriends, or whatever you're chasing. You'll find that thing because you are that thing, and that thing is closer than the tip of your own nose. But we're always looking for it out there, never realizing that it's actually right here. And the moment you stop chasing is when you start finding.
Wow. So powerful. Jerry, where can we find you?
Find me at lettinggotherapy.com. That's my website. I teach people how to let go of things that they've been holding on to for decades of their lives, sometimes in a single phone session. It's easier than you think. All you have to do is show up. And that's the hardest thing, is just showing up, declaring, making that decision, taking that stand for your life, for something better.
That feels so inviting. Isn't that what we want?
So I just want to thank you. And I'm glad that you've broken that generational bondage. And it gives me hope, because I've never thought of it that way. But I know there was generational bondage in my family. And it gives me hope that maybe I've healed not only for the future generations, but some of the past generations. I know my father was broken in many ways, and I never looked at him as that broken child like you were explaining with your mother. And I'm a little disappointed that I didn't think of that or address that when he was around, because that probably would have, we did address a lot of things, and we did really connect in his later years, but there was times when we didn't have a good relationship, and I think that could have helped me then. So I just want to thank you for giving me that.
You're welcome. And I leave you with this. In one of my deepest, darkest moments of despair, when I was meditating under the stars in the desert, and I felt that abandonment again, that fear and that loneliness, that self-pity, that rage. In that 30-year-old body, what I saw in my mind went back to that 7-year-old, crouched, sitting against the wall in a dark room. So that's what most people are feeling.
Mm.
And so when the world is at rage, at anger against you, to always just try to remember, to look past that older body, to imagine that little kid inside of that person, scared, trying to throw a tantrum by yelling, throwing a fit by screaming, that they're just scared. And when you can connect with that, that's when you can start to have compassion for other people.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Jerry, thank you so much for coming on. And yeah, I'm so grateful that we got to meet you, and I just love what you're bringing us. So thank you so much.
Yeah.
Anytime. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Great. Do you feel like you got to say everything you wanted to say? And
Yeah, I think so. I think, it was interesting having some of those old emotions come up again.
Mhm.
And it's always good. There's so many layers to things. I've done
Yeah.
so much work on myself, and it's surprising what these different angles do. Because like right now, I'm safe. I'm in an interview. There's just the two of you, and yet there's these triggers or these fears that want to come up. The
Mhm.
last thing for us to do is to avoid. One of my teachers said that every significant emotion has enough power to send a rocket to the moon. So that little bit of fear that I just felt had that much power to send a rocket to the moon. And what do we do? What do most men do with that little bit of fear? They try to suppress that. So it takes the same, if not more, to push that little bit down.
Mhm.
So how much of that are we bottling up, and how much of that is showing up in our bodies and in our lives, in our relationships with our spouse, with our partners, in our businesses, with our kids, and with ourselves? But if you just learn to embrace and let those things go, they're gone, and then you can be free.
I love that.
Yeah.
Love that. Well, thank you so much. And I'm so excited. Maybe after you go to Eileen's event, we can connect and you can tell me what it was like for you. And I really want you to hold your ground to what you want, what your heart,
Sounds good.
Yeah.
For sure.
So, well, thank you so much, Jerry.
You're welcome. Nice to meet you.
We would love to have you again. We do panels with some of the previous guests at times, and I'd love to have you with, especially to meet Nathan and Mike and Doug. That'd be phenomenal. So we'll try and keep in touch. And
Yeah, I love to be on. I love to serve as much as I can, because it helps me too. It helps me to shine the light on what else is that I'm holding on to. What else that are still there, and to be able to flesh those out in real time, and to actually show and demonstrate how that works with people.
Yeah.
That's how we change this world. That's how we raise our consciousness level.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I loved it that you did that you were, real and authentic, and that we don't really arrive. We just keep doing it. We keep learning, keep growing, keep moving in the path of healing.
Exactly.
So great.
Thank you, guys.
Great.
Thank you, Jerry.
Thank you, Jerry.
So that's it for today.
We are going to have a prayer time if you want to stick with us. If not, we believe in you.
We want to hear from you. We want to hear your stories.
If you like this podcast, please rate and review, because that's how other people can find us. And we really want to spread this message.
Father, I thank you for all the blessings that you've given us, and for the blessings of those who are trying to do work to help others, like Jerry and all the guests we've had on, that through their courage to share their story, they're trying to help those that have never told their story, or are afraid to tell their story, or just don't want to go there anymore. Just pray that they would have the courage to tell their story and to learn how to address their issues, and like Jerry said, to find those emotions and those feelings and to be able to let them go so they can move on and move past them. And Lord, I just pray for your blessing in their lives, for your blessing in Jerry's life, that you would bless him in his work and the people he is working with, Lord. And I just pray for your presence in their lives, that they would know that you love them and support them too. In your name I pray.
And Father, I thank you that there are many pathways to recovery, and that if what we're doing isn't working and we're still struggling, that maybe we might reach out and find other ways to get the help we need. And Lord, I love what Jerry said, how it's familiar and we want to hold on to it and we want to keep feeling the pain. And that the whole thing about you is you say we don't have to live in that pain. We don't have to hold on to it, Lord. So I pray that you'll help us to learn how to let go and to live the free life that you have for us, that we can move forward and experience new, beautiful things in our life. And that, yes, it's work. And yes, it's daily, but also that freedom from the pain, from the hurt is available. And then also, Lord, looking at those people that caused our abuse, realizing that it's probably generational and that we could offer some compassion. And I know we get there when we're able to forgive. So I thank you for that. In your son's holy name, amen.
Amen.